So, let's kick off the afternoon. Our guru, our mentor, the man who kind of led us through this murky water of masculinity from day one. 18 months ago, 12 of us rocked up at the little room down the corridor there, and we presented with Ben, who upturned our worlds for the better forever. So, big round of applause for our man, Ben Hurst.
This one. Hello. Oh, it's not that loud. Hi. I can project. Okay. I'm taller than that. All right. I need to get my ducks in a row. Sorry. Hold on a second. I'm not sending texts. It's fine. I'm just doing something important. I need to set a timer so that I don't keep going when I'm supposed to stop. If you see me looking at this, I'm looking at the time. Okay. Nice to meet you all. How's everyone doing? Good? Okay, it's going to be this type of session, just so you know. Look, I'm already trying to walk around. I'm like a mover, I'm a shaker, and I don't enjoy silence. So please respond, please heckle, do whatever feels good. If you've got questions, ask questions. My name is Ben, it's lovely to be here. First of all, guys, I'm so proud of you guys. I don't know, so I do this for work, this is my job. I work for an organisation called Beyond Equality. We work in schools, universities, corporates, engaging men and boys in gender equality conversations around, I don't have to, but those are the people that we are targeting. Okay, so, oh, I see what you're saying. Sorry, I used it in terms of everyone in the room, didn't I? My bad. Sorry. Not guys. Folk is better. Peeps, sibs, siblings, sibs. Sibs is good. Sibs is gender neutral. Okay, sibs. Sorry, my bad. Just in case I do it again, just give me a wave because I'm definitely gonna do it again. It's in there. It's like hardwired in. But just wave at me and I'll correct myself. You're right. You're not wrong. When I said heckle, I wasn't being serious. Just so everyone knows, don't keep, no, I'm joking, keep going, it's good. All right, cool. So, okay. All right, can I take this out? Am I allowed to move with this mic? Is that okay? Can I, yeah, okay, stay on the stage. All right, perfect. So, as I was saying, I want to say guys again. I'm saying guys to you guys. Thank you so much. I'm so proud of you. I think that this is like the point of the work that we do as an organisation. So we try and engage men and boys in these conversations around masculinities, around what we like about it, what we don't like about it, what needs to change. Imagine it as like a deconstruction and a reconstruction of masculinity for men. And when we did this piece of work with you guys, you really took it on. We can see that it's been embedded, and I think the most important thing is that we don't want these conversations to end at the end of the conversation, right? We want them to carry forward. And so I'm so proud of you to see a room full of people having these conversations because you've carried on working. So thank you so much. And also, what else do I need to say? Dress code. I'm bad at dress codes. I never know how to dress for a conference, right? Like I always feel like it's super awkward. Keep my hand above this bit. Oh, is that what makes that noise? All right, here we go. This is a rocky start. I'm usually better than this, just so you know. All right, cool. So I'm happy to be here. Also, I've never felt this positive about police before. Shout out to you, Andy. I'm from London, so it's a different vibe. But you guys are doing a really good job. Okay, anyway. What we're doing today, we're having a super interesting conversation about men and about masculinities. It's a super important conversation. Hopefully it will be engaging. Hopefully it will be entertaining. Hopefully we'll have a good time. I say conversation because it is going to be a conversation. I'm not just going to talk at you for 40 or 60 minutes straight. You're going to talk to each other. I'm not really going to take feedback, but as I said, feel free to heckle if you want to. And what I'm going to do today is I'm going to offer you a lens for viewing a topic, right? The conversations that we've been having, shout out to Megan, and shout out to Ben as well, who did a great job earlier on, are about violence against women and girls and prevention of violence against women and girls. Sometimes I feel like we jump steps ahead when we're trying to engage men in those conversations, and we dive straight into like, this is what's wrong, this is how you need to fix it, rather than having a conversation about what's going on for them. So we're going to start there, and I'm going to offer you a lens. You do not have to keep it, right? If you get to the end of this session and you think, Ben, that was bullshit, feel free to discard it. Never think about it again. Please don't email me. But if you get to the end and you're like, that was really good, hold on to it, take it forward, keep thinking about it, keep processing it. I'll give you a list at the end of like things you can read, things you can watch, things you can listen to continue the learning. There are no silver bullets in this conversation, right? Otherwise we wouldn't be doing this job anymore. I'd be very rich and it would be done. So it's an ongoing process. We've got to keep having the conversation and keep thinking about it in new ways and innovating ideas. And it's absolutely fundamental. I'm super happy that all of you are here. This is like a much bigger turnout than I imagined. I don't know what you guys, oh gosh, I don't know what you lot thought was going to happen, but this is huge. So I'm really glad that you're all here, and hopefully you all engage with this very well. Okay, let's get going. So who am I? I've said this already, haven't I? I work for an organisation called Beyond Equality, so we engage men and boys in gender equality conversations. I also do lots of other cool stuff, which is not super relevant here right now, so I'll move on. And content warning. So we're going to be discussing some topics that can be a little bit heavy, can be a little bit sensitive. You don't have to read all of that that's on the screen right now. Basically, the crux of it is take care of yourself. So if you need to leave, you don't need to ask permission. If you need to walk out, if you need to go to the bathroom, if you want to go home and not come back, you already paid for the ticket, so it's fine. Don't worry about it. Hold on. Stick with me. Stick with me. I guarantee you'll enjoy it. Okay, how did I get here? Okay, what I'm going to cover today, that's a better way of doing it. So we're going to look at understanding masculinities, then we're going to look at like what's causing parts of the problem, maybe in terms of men's violence against women and girls. We're also going to look at how this impacts men, right? Because I think so often, I was having a conversation over lunch about this very topic. So often, we have this conversation about saving women, when actually men are screwed as well. So we probably need to have conversations about how we save ourselves. So we're going to be doing a little bit of that, and then we're going to look towards solutions, trying to figure out what next steps can be. Everybody cool with that? Anything that's missing? I'm not a stats guy. Nate's coming up afterwards. So if I miss anything, he'll let you know. And there's going to be time for questions. I'm going to try my best to leave time for questions. I'm already over time, but I'm going to try my best to like not speak too fast, but also leave enough time so that you can ask whatever you want to ask. Feel free to send things on the Slido as we're going through, so that you don't have to like wait at the end and then type them up. You can send them at any point, or just stick your hand up if there's something that's burning, and I'll try and get round to everyone. Okay. So let's start with an activity. That's enough talking. We're going to do an activity that's called Gender Stories. This is one of the activities that we run in workshops. I think it's really good. Some people hate it, but it's fine. Just go with it. You'll enjoy it, don't worry. What is going to happen, it's more of a reminder for me than for you. So this activity is about practicing active listening. So what I'm going to get you to do, I don't know if anybody else does this, right? I have a really bad habit that when I start listening to someone and I gauge that they're like halfway through, I kind of I still look like I'm listening, but I shut down and start thinking about how I'm going to respond. So we're not going to do that right now. I want you to listen to the end. I'm going to give each of you a minute. Label yourselves person A and B with the person sitting next to you. I'm going to ask you a question, and person A is going to answer that question for 1 minute uninterrupted. You can like nod, you can smile, or you can laugh, but you can't say, me too, that reminds me of a time when you can't interrupt, okay? You just got to listen for a minute, and then we'll swap, and person B will answer the same question. I'm seeing some anxiety in the room. It's fine. Don't worry about it. If you want to, you can just sit in silence for your minute. I wouldn't advise it, but you can do that. Okay, so label yourselves person A and B with the person sitting next to you. Ready? People labeling themselves A and B always takes longer than you think it's going to take. It's such a weird paradox. Okay, the first question is going to be, when did you first become aware of your gender? When did you, I know, it's tough. Think about it for 10 seconds. When did you first become aware of your gender? When was the first time you thought about it? When was the first time it felt relevant to you? When was the first time you remember thinking, oh, I am this, or I am that, or I'm not this, or I'm not that? In your pairs, we're going to start with person B. I lied. So person B, you're going first. You've got 1 minute. Go for it. Yeah, just go. You go. Okay, and you got to stop. You have to stop. I know it's brutal. I'm sorry, but you have to. We're going to swap. So person A, you've got 1 minute starting now. Go for it. Okay, that's 1 minute done. We're gonna do. You have to stop. You have to stop. Don't keep talking. Okay, we're gonna do. Everybody always does that. They're like, no, 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 no. We're gonna do another one. So label yourselves person A and B. You can swap if you want. You can do it with someone else, or you can keep the same person. I'm not bothered. Next question is gonna be: what did you learn from your same-sex parent, carer, or role model about your gender? What did you learn from your same-sex parent, carer, or role model about your gender? Also, I just want to clarify, there are a lot of assumptions in this question which might not be true for all of us, right? So, but I want you to think about sex, biological sex, if you had a same-sex parent, carer, or role model, or if you didn't think about somebody who wasn't one of those people, what did you learn about yourself from those people around you? I'm going to give you 1 minute. We're going to start with person B. I got you again. Okay, person B, you got 1 minute starting now. Okay, and we're going to swap around. So person A, you have 1 minute to answer the same question. Go for it, go. Okay, that's the end of your time. That's the end of your time. That's the end of your time. Normally, normally, I would take lots of feedback from this activity, but that will eat up the whole of the rest of this session. So we're not going to do that. Just give me a show of hands. If you really enjoyed it, wave. Oh, really? Okay. If you absolutely hated it, wave. A couple people. If you didn't care, give me a show of you. That's also valid. Thank you for sharing. Okay. Thank you for sharing so much. All right, so we do this activity in workshops, and usually there are a couple of main takeaways that come out. I'm sure that you will fall into maybe one of these three categories. So the first one is, for men, generally, they don't really think about these conversations, right? These are not conversations that are super prominent, super prevalent, sorry. They're not things that they've had to consider generally at any point in their life. Actually, the most common response when I do this activity with men is that being asked this question is the first time they've ever considered it in their lives. So interesting response. Opposite to that, or sometimes maybe opposite, I don't know if opposite is the right word, but an alternative is that for women, they think about this stuff all the time. Usually by nature of being told that they're not allowed to do things whilst growing up. So that's the most common response we get from women, that they were told when they were girls that they weren't allowed to play football with the boys, that they had to wear a skirt if they were going to a wedding, they had to do certain things, there were certain expectations that they had to live up to. But either way, what we find is that we all adopt these social scripts, right, about who we're supposed to be, about what gender is and how it operates for us. I know from my dad, the three things that I learned from him as a role model were that men always get the big bit of chicken every day. They always read the newspaper when they come home from work, and they never sit in the same room with everybody else when they get back. They always need time alone to decompress, which I have adopted. No, I haven't adopted that. Those are not good things, except the chicken one. Okay, so these social scripts, right, they exist for all of us in lots of different ways. This is also super binary. So we're talking about men and women. We're not including the range of other identities that can exist when we're talking about gender, which brings to question, what are we talking about when we're talking about gender, right? What actually is that? Because I think this is a confusing question. Whenever we talk about it in schools, boys always talk about penises and vaginas. They always think it's biological sex, which is not quite accurate. Now, I know that there are loads of schools of thought around the idea of gender, and I didn't come here to be divisive today. I go to other places to do that. So, what I will do is use the World Health Organization definition, because we don't all have to agree with it, but at least we will all be on the same page. I feel like that's a safe place to start. So, gender refers to the characteristics of women, men, girls, and boys, reductive, that are socially constructed. This includes norms, behaviors, and roles associated with being a woman, man, girl, or boy, as well as relationships with others. As a social construct, gender varies from society to society and can change over time. So we're looking at something that's actually quite nebulous, maybe socially constructed, probably just a set of rules that we all kind of feel like we have to live up to, but also that evolves and change as we move place, location, time, space, all of the space, what? But as we move around, right, it changes depending on where you are. So when we're talking specifically about masculinity, this can be really, really confusing, right? Because I think, I don't know what image comes to your mind when you think of masculinity. For me, it's always James Bond, which I think is actually weird. Maybe I've got some work to do there. But I always instantly go to James Bond as what the model of a man is, what the model of masculinity, and not just a man, but a masculine man, what he's supposed to look like, how he's supposed to carry himself, how he relates to women, which is slightly problematic, how he relates to other people by killing them, right? And so masculinity is a pretty reductive construct, a very rigid set of rules that already exists. When you Google masculinity, the images that come up are super interesting. It's always this has changed as well. We had to change it because I think maybe they heard my talk and then changed it. I'm a little bit famous, I don't know if you knew. But it used to be a picture of a guy shouting at no one. There was nothing else in the space. He was just fuming and shouting. And they've changed it to guys pumping iron, guys wearing suits, and guys flexing muscles. And we've got qualities and attributes regarded as being a man. So being manly, being vigorous, being strong. These are social norms and parts of our identities that we all kind of accept as a given. It's fixed, it's determined. It's already determined. You don't really get to decide it for yourself. It already exists. And it's generally a bunch of stereotypes. Not all of them negative. It's important to say, really, really early on. Not all of these stereotypes about being a man are bad things. Some of them are good. Some of them should be able to be adopted by everyone. Some of them are shit. Maybe we should get rid of them. We'll have that conversation a little bit later on. Now, we're talking about masculinity, but the term that we like to use at Beyond Equality is masculinities. So we try to open that up a little bit more and talk more generally than those specific sets of expectations that are placed on men. So masculinities differs based on, like I said, nation, class, culture, is socially constructed. So if you think about masculinities in Plymouth, really different to masculinities in London, really different to masculinities in Newcastle, really different to masculinities in Newcastle, really different to masculinities in Afghanistan, really different to masculinities all around the world, right? It changes depending on where we are. One man's masculinity is individual and different to another man's masculinity. It always makes me think of how men who have physical disabilities relate to masculinity, because there's a set of expectations about what we're supposed to be that's not necessarily accessible to all of us. So we have to kind of broaden this definition out a little bit to involve everyone in the conversation, and it's complex and it's multi-dimensional. So we do an activity in schools called a word race, where we set the kids up in 2 lines, and we get them to, basically we just cause as much chaos as possible. Get them to run to whiteboards and write down any words they associate with a topic. Oh my gosh. The first topic we do is men. The second topic we do is women, or sometimes we do like breakfast as a practice round. But we're just trying to surface all of the standards and expectations they have of gender. Now, these are some of the results that come up when the boys do these word race activities. So we've got things like aggressive, sporty, beer, strong, dominant, powerful, penis. Powerful penis is interesting. Masculine, big, successful, and so on and so forth. Actually, this is like a really sterilized version of this, right? Generally, when we actually do this in real life, there's like 50 different words for penis, and then maybe some other things. And the same for women. It tends to center around biology, but then once they move past that, we got ideas like feminine, caring, kind, mother, kitchen, which is an interesting one, loving, gentle, weak, and emotional. So these ideas, right, these scripts that exist about who we are supposed to be are very, very clear from a very young age. We're talking boys at the age of 11 already know, whether they believe this or not, they already know what it is. They already know it exists. They already know what men are supposed to be like. They know what women are supposed to be like. If you ask them where they get it from, they might tell you they get it from religion. They might tell you they get it from media. They might tell you they get it from books. Not many of them read books, actually. That's a lie. They might tell you they get it from their friends, from their peers, from their parents, from a range of different places. But these ideas and these expectations, they exist, right? They're set already. And so, a guy I really like called Tony Porter speaks about this idea called the man box, or what he calls the collective socialization of men. So the collective socialization of men is like the formalization of what it means in our society to be a man. So we've got things in here like not crying and not expressing emotion, not expressing weakness or fear, demonstrating power and control, valuing aggression and dominance, and being a protector. Not being like a woman, being heterosexual, so not being like a gay man, being tough, being athletic, being strong, being courageous, making decisions, and viewing women as objects or as property. Now, some of these things, again, are not necessarily bad things, right? Like being athletic, being strong, being courageous, being tough. Not necessarily evil, like not inherently bad, but some of these things are quite clearly negative and need to be destabilized or disrupted a little bit. And so when we're having these conversations in schools with boys, or when we're having these conversations with men, it's important to establish what it is that we're talking about so that we all have a shared understanding of what the issue is and how we move forward from that. Now, this man box is like a super restrictive set of ideals. Boys are socialized into it from a very, very young age, from like 3, 4. I've got 6 nieces. I've got 3 sisters, so that's yeah, that does work. I've got 6 nieces and I've got 1 nephew. My nephew's 1 year old at the moment, but he lives in Australia, so I haven't like hung out with him while he's been able to hang out yet. But I'm really looking forward to like buying him dinosaurs, which I know I shouldn't say because that is like the antithesis of my job, but I really want to do it. And none of the girls wanted dinosaurs. They just weren't on it. So they know from like 5 or 6 years old. I know my nieces started telling me boys were disgusting when they were like 4, right? Like they knew there was a difference. They were like, boys, I don't know if it's like Dennis the Menace or what they were watching, maybe Peppa Pig, I'm not sure. But they get those ideas from very, very early. Now, when they step out of those kinds of ideas, we are peeved penalized, right? Like there's serious consequences. In secondary schools, we know that behavior is policed really, really harshly. So boys are bullied, boys are beaten up, boys are picked on, they're called names if they step outside of those expectations of what they're supposed to be. And this impacts all different people, right? It impacts men, it also impacts women. Also, it's not just men who police these ideas and these expectations. Women, non-binary people, trans people also police these ideas for other people. And so we've got to be able to establish what those ideas are, again, to be able to disrupt them. The three main focuses of this man box, I would say, boil down to these things, right? So number one is a focus on money, whether that's like provision, whether it's protection, whether it's having things you want. I know we've mentioned Andrew Tate already, right? I didn't want to be the first person to say it. Yeah, we've mentioned Andrew Tate. Okay, so a focus on money is one of the big key themes, right? Again, when I think of James Bond, I think of money. I think of nice suits, nice cars, having nice things, like watches that explode when you throw them at people, that kind of stuff. Number two focuses on sex. So being able to get sex, being able to have sex with whoever you want to have sex with, particularly with women, and being able to dominate them in that regard. And number three is dominance, right? So whether we're talking about the positive end of that, which might be competition, not necessarily evil, might be fun, you can learn things through being part of a team, or the other end, which is control, which can be really, really harmful to us and to other people around us. Now, we know that these three things are core tenets of what it means to be a man in our society. I'm not saying they're core tenets of my masculinity, but we know that those narratives and those scripts exist for men in general. And we see, right, who's answering the questions that boys and men are asking. Now, we've seen over the last couple of years, maybe the last, is it a decade? Is 10? Yeah, over the last 2 decades, thank you. We've seen like the rise of these influencers in certain areas and certain spheres. So it started with maybe Neil Strauss, who was the author of a book called The Game. Has anybody heard of The Game? There was also a sick series on MTV that I watched before as a feminist, which was actually really enjoyable, but terrible in hindsight. So Neil Strauss basically was a pickup artist, so taught men how to talk to women to get women to sleep with him. And then we see Jordan Peterson, who doesn't take that route, takes a very self-developmental route, gives boys answers, gives men answers about what they need to do. So things like going to the gym, things like being fit, being healthy, wearing nice clothes, grooming yourself, making your bed when you wake up. Really, really basic things that you can do to be more successful or achieve more in society. Kevin Samuels has passed now, but was like a YouTube influencer who recently was doing lots of content. He would do these things where he would rate women. Women would call on to the shows. I can see the only black person smiling because he knows what I'm talking about. You know what I'm talking about. Kevin Samuels is a black thing. But he used to do this thing where he would get women on these YouTube channels and they would talk about their expectations, and then he would rate them out of 10 and try and basically tear them down. So something called negging, which is, again, a thing that Neil Strauss kind of made popular. So breaking someone down in order to get them to do what you want. And then Andrew Tate, who we're all aware of, takes it to a really far extreme, where misogyny becomes also a core tenet of what's happening here. So it's not just about being successful in yourself, but it's about abusing and taking advantage of other people and making those people do what you want them to do. So we see these really harmful spectrums of where this narrative can lead us to. Again, not all of these components are necessarily bad things, but what we do see is that men and that boys are looking for answers about who they're supposed to be. I know that there's been a lot of changes over the last 100 years in terms of moving from the Industrial Revolution, moving from an age where men were about physical labor and we had to do physical work to gain our position in society, to an age where we don't really have to do that anymore. And while feminism has been an advancement for women in lots of ways of thinking about who they can be and what's possible and what's achievable for them, we haven't really had that same conversation in regards to men, except for these guys who are having that conversation, but in a way that can be really harmful to men and to boys. So something we need to think about there. Now, how does this engage or appeal to men and boys? So number one, it reflects and confirms everything they've been taught about manhood and masculinity. The reason that these messages resonate are because they're not new. They're not new ideas. It's not anything revolutionary. It's stuff that we've known about for a long time. Number two, it plays into their fears and into their insecurities about not being good enough, about not being enough. Number three, it gives them permission to not have to reflect. It's almost like a get out of jail free card, right? Where it excuses bad or negative behavior or behavior that impacts other people negatively masculinity because that's what you're supposed to be doing. And number 4, it provides them with an answer, a very, very simple answer to very, very complex problems. So the result of this in lots of different ways is that men tend to adopt what we at Beyond Equality call an emotional armor. So it limits their means of emotional expression. They don't have as much emotional literacy as their counterparts. They're not able to express themselves, not able to talk about how they're feeling. I remember actually, I'm talking about men in general, let me talk about myself specifically. I remember being in a relationship previously where I realized that I wasn't good at having difficult conversations, so I started timing myself at how long I could have a difficult conversation for. And when I started, it was about 12 minutes before I needed to tap out of the conversation. I was like, it's too much, too heavy. And I kept working until it got to like an hour and 10 minutes. Now it's gone down a little bit, I think, actually. But we'll work on it again. But those things, right, those expectations that we'd be able to have those conversations, it's just not really there for men. They're not socialized into doing that. So it's not every man can't do it. That's not what I'm saying. Some men are really good at this stuff. But as a rule, men in general are not taught how to do that. One of the questions I always ask in workshops is, think about what you were doing when you were in school at break time when you were in primary school. And for men, the answer is often that they were running around, playing football, playing throw and catch, playing tag. And then I asked them to think about where the girls were. And they always say that the girls were somewhere else, around the side, sitting down, singing Spice Girls. I don't know, maybe my generation. But doing something else around the side. When I asked them what they were doing, generally it boils down to talking. And so what we know is that girls are socialized to talk from a very, very young age, where boys are not socialized or encouraged to do that. I've got a question over here. Mm. Mm. Yeah. Mm. Yeah, and you know what? That's so true, right? Like, there's definitely that point when they hit 11 and they go to secondary school. I always wonder if it's being surrounded by older boys, or being at the bottom of the pecking order again once they've made it all the way to the top, that kind of shifts them into that position of kind of shutting down emotionally or not sharing, but definitely something to do with not being, their needs not being met in that way, or that not being a priority in the way that they relate to other people. Keep going. Yeah, 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 yeah. You're right. In case anybody didn't hear, that was basically the adults in the room need to take responsibility for the nurturing of the boys in those environments, which is 100% true. There's a phrase that I heard, which was that we nurture our daughters and we coach our sons. And that expectation that we teach our boys to do better, to be better, whereas we look after the emotional well-being of our girls. Which again, if we are lucky, yeah, if we are very fortunate, that is true. I'm going to keep going, otherwise I'm going to run out of time, but thank you for sharing, both of you. So stereotypes of being a problem solver, these are the things that we're looking at when we're talking about that emotional armor, or that socialized expectation of what men are supposed to be like. So being a problem solver, not sharing, not talking about need, not talking about struggle, not talking about pain, a lack of spaces to develop meaningful friendships, harmful coping strategies. So when we're looking at men, we're talking about things like drug abuse, alcohol abuse, all of those kinds of ways that we try and look after ourselves when we're not being looked after, and identity or group specific issues. So men's mental health, I'm sure you would have heard the phrase that men are in crisis, which is not my favorite phrase, but it is interesting, especially when we look specifically at mental health outcomes for men in our society today. So we're looking at men who are 3 times as likely to die by suicide, which doesn't mean that men are attempting suicide more than women. It just means they're attempting more final methods of suicide. And so they're more likely to die. Suicide, I think, think at the moment is the lead killer for men under the age of 45 in the UK. Men are more likely to go missing, to sleep rough, to become homeless, or to become dependent on drugs or alcohol. They have lower levels of life satisfaction. I don't actually know how they measure that, but I do know they also have lower life expectancies, which is important. But lower levels of life satisfaction than women and lower life expectancies than women. And men are less likely to access psychological therapies. So only 36% of referrals to the NHS talking therapies are from men. Now, this is a problem, right? Because we know that the outcomes mean that for whatever reason, our lens says maybe it's all of these reasons we've listed here, but maybe it's another reason. Whatever reason, men are struggling. They're not accepting help. They're not asking for help, but they are struggling with lots of things. Privilege reflection. Somebody brought up privilege. I only put this in the, I think it was in the first, maybe when Andy was talking, because you said privilege, which is like icky, sticky in a room with like 10 minutes and 250 people. It's a difficult conversation to have. So I've set up an activity here where I'm going to get you to do a little bit of a reflection really quickly before we kind of wrap up and close here. What I'd love for you to do is, if you feel comfortable, would you close your eyes? If you don't feel comfortable, you can just look down, but it's meant to be anonymous. You're not meant to be looking at what other people are doing. So whatever you do, just don't watch other people. I'm going to read you a series of statements, and if the statement is relevant to you, I'd like you to raise your hand when I read it out, and then just put your hand back down. You don't need to say anything. And when you are ready, you can all close your eyes. So, number one is, if you are able to go for a walk after dark without planning your route, please raise your hand. Number two is, if you are able to go on a date with a stranger without the fear of sexual assault, please raise your hand. If you have never in your career felt worried or afraid about working late with a colleague, please raise your hand. If you've never had to change the way you looked or sounded to gain credibility or to encourage acceptance by your colleagues, please raise your hand. If you're confident that you'll be listened to in a team meeting, please raise your hand. If you'd never think twice about calling the police if trouble occurred, please raise your hand. If you've never had to worry about being the only person of your gender in a work setting, please raise your hand. If you've never heard a joke at work about your gender and felt scared to challenge it, please raise your hand. If you've never had to consider childcare arrangements before accepting a job role, please raise your hand. Okay, you can place your hands down and you can open your eyes and join me back in the room. Sorry, I'm always smiling at the end of that. I know for some people that's quite a difficult activity. The point here is to establish this idea of what we're talking about when we're using that word privilege, right? Which is, that's not the right slide. But the idea of privilege, so what we're talking about when we're talking about privilege is a set of unearned advantages we have just because of who we are. It's not anything to do with morality. It's not to do with who you are as a person, how good you are, how nice you are, how kind you are to other people. It's entirely to do with luck of the draw, right? The cards that you were dealt at birth, and how you present in the world. And if you have a certain set of cards, the way that you move through the world can be much easier. So that can be to do with race, it can be to do with class, it can be to do with faith, religion, it can be to do with nationality, it can be to do with ability and disability. When we're having conversations about masculinity, particularly with men, we have to have that conversation about masculinity, about maleness, right? About being a man. Because there are a certain set of expectations or privileges that are attached to that. There's also a counter set of expectations or responsibilities that are attached to that. That can be a lot of pressure that we kind of neglect to talk about sometimes. So that's also an important part of the conversation. And one of the key tenets of privilege is that we're not saying that because you've got privilege, you've had an easy life. I always think about it as like going to university, right? If you go to university, you want a degree, you have to do the work. There's no shortcut. Everybody's got to do the work. But some people have got other things that they have to think about. So some people have to care for dependents. Some people have to work a job while they're studying happening at the same time. There are just other barriers that other people have to overcome, sometimes to achieve the same thing. And when we're talking about violence against women and girls, which is the theme of what we're talking about here, I'm not going to go over these statistics again. M.A.N already covered them very well earlier on. But we're looking at a set of expectations, or a set of realities, not even expectations, where we know that disproportionately women and girls are impacted by this. And we know that disproportionately it's not being perpetrated by women and girls, which means that as much as there are conversations for us to have as men about what it means to be a man, about the bits of that that are difficult, the bits of that are hard, the bits of that that we want to change, we also have to have a conversation about what we do with our privileges, with the fact that we're able to walk along the street at night without worrying about our safety, depending on where we live, so I live in London, but we're able to do some of those things that women are not able to do, and we take it as a norm. And another key tenet of privilege is that it's invisible to those of us who have it, right? For those of us who live within this system that prioritizes us and our well-being all the time, we might not see it that way. I remember the first time somebody asked me how many disabled or easy access train stations there were in the tube in London, and I assumed every single one was accessible, but actually it's only 22%, which means if you're living with a disability, you can't even get around the city. And so in some ways, we need to have that conversation about what's taken away from women, or what they're limited to or from. Timer. I've got 2 minutes left. Okay, so we then need to have a conversation about what allyship looks like, which is super important. So allyship is this idea of how we as men, or in the other parts of our identities, we as people who experience privilege, can leverage that privilege to make something that's not our issue, our issue. So using our influence to remove barriers to other people's inclusion. And until we've had that conversation, this conversation about violence against women and girls, we will not move forward. It's absolutely imperative. I know for some people it's uncomfortable. I know it's not fun. The first time I had this conversation, I didn't enjoy it. It wasn't great. But it's so important because we have power in society, and we're not a slave to these systems that exist around us, right? We have the ability to challenge things and the ability to change things. So how do we move forward towards solutions? In closing, number one, first thing we can do is to challenge stereotypes with men and with boys. So wherever you see them, whether that's in your families, in your communities, in your workplaces, if you're a teacher in the schools that you work in, challenge those stereotypes and those expectations and those norms whenever you see them. Doesn't mean that people can't do what they're doing, just means they should think about those things critically and make decisions for themselves. Number two, role modeling. So it's not just about pointing our fingers at other people, it's also about adopting those things in ourselves, changing the ways that we behave, changing the ways that we relate to other people, so that we're modeling more positive versions of what masculinity can look like, that we've consciously thought about and chosen for ourselves. Earlier on, when they were leaving the stage, the guys said that they hug a lot here, right? Which is a really intentional decision to disrupt a norm, which is that men can't be intimate with one another because it makes them gay, in inverted commas. Now, I was under the impression that being gay was about wanting to have sex or liking men, right? Being sexually attracted to men. And if you're not that, but you still want to hug guys, you should be allowed to do that. That's something that's normal, that's fine, that's good, that's healthy. So challenging those norms and role modeling them to other people becomes really important. Exploring non-prescriptive versions of masculinity. I know that when I do this talk, the thing that people want me to do is tell them what the new way to be a man is. So scrap the old way. We're not doing James Bond anymore. Now we're doing this. We're doing kindness and gentleness and being caring. But actually, until we address the power imbalance that exists in our society, any of those characteristics that we give to men can be corrupted in the same way as the other ones have, right? Being a protector, being a provider can be good things, but it's become corrupted. Being kind, being gentle, being caring can be good things, but can also become corrupted. So having new ways of exploring with that same mindset of critical analysis, new ways of exploring what positive masculinity can look like for us as individuals and then for us in community with other people. Normalizing having struggles and seeking help. I had an amazing conversation over lunch with somebody who told me that they had experienced a lot of hardship because of their maleness, actually in a way that didn't get spoken about. So in terms of like access to children, in terms of some other things that I won't get into. But what was really interesting about that conversation was that when I asked them what they did when they were struggling with all of those things, their response was, well, I manned up because I had to. And actually, that's probably not the solution to the problem, right? So we need to find ways of normalizing seeking help and asking for support. Tailoring conversations and support for men in particular. So when we're having conversations with men, we need to speak to the issues that they're experiencing. The same way that Jordan Peterson, the same way that Andrew Tate are speaking to those issues specifically, we need to find ways to give answers to those problems so that young men and older men can be encouraged and have something to aim for. And the last one is doing something is better than doing nothing. So no matter what you do, I think this whole process actually is a process of like making mistakes and being good at apologizing for them and then trying again. So actually doing anything and then getting some feedback on it and adapting it is probably better than doing nothing at all. Last thing is, how should we approach men? So number one, slightly countercultural here, but actually with curiosity is one of the most important things. So not assuming things about people's experiences is really, really important, but being genuinely interested in what's going on for those men that we're trying to work with, we're trying to reach, we're trying to have conversations with. With empathy is really, really important. So being empathetic, being kind, being gentle. With exploration, giving them an opportunity to figure things out for themselves, to arrive at better conclusions, and with fun. Doesn't have to be super boring. It can be really enjoyable, it can be really interesting. Still the gender stories activity. Use it at Christmas dinner if you celebrate Christmas, or at any family gathering. It's a great conversation starter. Reasons for hope, just before we finish. Number one, conversations in our society have moved forward, right? We know for some bad reasons and also for some positive reasons, you guys have spoken about local events that have happened in Plymouth that have brought these conversations to the forefront. We also have national conversations about things around the murder of Sarah Everard, the murder of Sabina Nessa, all of those kinds of things that have happened that have made these conversations more prominent and more prevalent. So we know things are changing and people are having these conversations. Number two, men can actually change their minds, right? People are capable of change. I know when we did these sessions with the Plymouth M.A.N group, there was a guy who really struggled with this idea of privilege and actually went home and came back the next day and was fuming. He was like, I didn't sleep. You said I'm a bad person. I said, no, I didn't. But he came a long way in that conversation and was able to arrive at some different conclusions to the conclusions that he started at. You start with conclusions to the presuppositions. Never mind. Number three, more compassionate conversations are the most powerful tool that we have, right? So if we can just adjust, even if we can't change society as a whole, if we can change ourselves and the way we approach these conversations, we'll make massive strides towards more positive outcomes for men and for everybody else in our societies. Follow and support our work. That's me. I'm finished. If you need to find us, if you've got any questions to ask, we're going to ask some questions now, I think, if there's any time left. No, we're doing Q&A. Or shoot us an email, or if you want to book us for work, we're not opposed to that. And I'll show you the reading list afterwards.